Just Google the word strategy and you'll get almost 740 million hits. So we're going to have to focus on one critical strategic topic during this session. And choosing that one topic is really difficult. But in this boot camp, we'll do that for you. And I've thought a lot about this, and the strategic topic which I've chosen is going to be very important for your career. And that strategic topic is how to navigate a business through the continuous change and disruptions that are going on today in the marketplace. And to help answer that complicated question, we're going to rely on some ideas based on one of the leading experts and consulting companies in the field. And the expert's name is Martin Reeves, and Martin is a senior partner and managing director of Boston Consulting Group's New York office. Boston Consulting Group, usually we call them BCG, so we'll use BCG in the future, and they're one of the leading strategy consulting companies in the world. So are you ready for a journey into the subject of strategy? Well, let's begin. If you recall, at the beginning of this boot camp, we discussed change and how change is a permanent part of business today. And we also discussed agility, or what we called ambidextrous capabilities in companies. And remember the lake metaphor and our discussion about the need to adapt depending on the conditions and being able to adapt. And according to Martin Reeves at BCG, strategic thinking traditionally doesn't really fit these rapidly changing conditions, especially if we hope to survive and prosper under those conditions. Because in those fast-changing times, traditional approaches to strategy are no longer effective. But please keep in mind that not all companies are faced with the same level of change in their business environment. And not all companies have the capabilities to influence the change which is occurring in their business environment. So that's important to remember. And another important point to remember here is that different strategies are required for different conditions. And because of this, a company should define their strategy based on their unique capabilities and the conditions in the market that they face. So as a matter of fact, BCG developed a strategic framework based on this idea. And it's that framework that we're going to focus on in the session. And the framework is based on two different environmental conditions a company can face and two forms of capabilities that they might have. And the result is a four-quadrant matrix, or four choices, which can be used by a company to determine their strategy and their strategic planning processes. Actually, BCG came up with a fifth style, which they call survival. But we're not going to discuss that here in this session. Okay, now I have prompted your interest in what that fifth style is, and I'm sure that you're very curious to hear a little about it. That fifth style, after I mentioned it a minute ago, that style is called survival. And during survival, a company assumes a defensive position. They're focused on radically reducing their costs and business activities in order to survive the crisis they're facing. And they're doing that in the hope that they can survive the crisis and that the crisis will end soon in the future. Otherwise, they're dead. They're dead because the clock is running fast and because they're not making the necessary investments in developing their business for the future when they're cutting all the time. They are in the deathbed. But let's forget about the survival style for now. Unless, of course, your company is in survival mode, which many companies are, because in that case, it's critical for you to know more about that style in order that your company might survive long enough. But okay, enough about survival. Let's move on to the four styles that we just introduced. So as I said a moment ago, there are 4 strategic styles we will focus on. And these are based on 2 different environmental conditions a company might face. The first of those conditions is the level of predictability in your business environment. So what does predictability mean? Predictability means how far into the future and how accurately you can confidently forecast what might happen. For example, what will happen with the demand in the market, the performance of your company, the competition, or the market expectations that you're faced with. In other words, how far ahead of you, with reasonable certainty, can you predict what might happen in your business? Because this is easier in some businesses than others, it's possible to measure that. The second condition is called malleability. And to simplify the word malleability, for our purposes, let's use the word workable. And workable defines to what extent you or your competition can influence the predictability factors we just listed. How much influence can you have on those? In other words, how much of an impact can you have on the future? That's an important question. And now imagine that you're drawing on a piece of paper 2 lines. On the left side of the paper, from the bottom to the top, or what we call the y-axis, you draw a long line from bottom to top. And we'll call that line predictability. At the bottom of that line, we have a point where you can predict what's going to happen in your business. But at the top of that line, there is a point where no predictability exists. Now we draw at the bottom of the page, from left to right, another line. And we'll call that line workability or malleability. At the far left of that line, there is no workability. Or in other words, you can't do much to change the conditions your company faces. But on the far right of that line, there's a great deal of workability. In other words, you can influence, change a great deal. So now we have 2 lines, which meet at the bottom left of the page you're drawing on. And based on these 2 variables, predictability, malleability, we could now divide this page up into 4 quadrants, or a 4-quadrant strategic matrix. By the way, BCG are famous for 4-quadrant matrices, which help managers visualize better complex business conditions. Therefore, their most famous matrix is called the BCG growth share matrix, where you have cows and dogs, etc. Anyway, based on how predictable and how malleable or workable your business is in the environment that you're working in, you can now position your company on this strategic matrix. And depending on which position, which of the 4 quadrants you may find yourself in, you can consider the best strategy and strategic planning method for your company. And this is important because according to BCG research, companies who match their strategic style with the conditions in their business environment perform much better than others who don't match their strategic style with their environment. As a matter of fact, by matching your correct strategic style with conditions in the market, your company could increase their returns or performance in their business by as much as 4 to 8%, according to the BCG research. And believe me, that is a very nice increase indeed. And as I said a moment ago, the strategy style matrix you have now drawn and divided up into 4 quadrants represents 4 different strategic styles you can choose from. The bottom left box we can name classical. Let's name the bottom right box visionary. The top left box will name adaptive. And finally, the top right box will name shaping. So we now have a matrix which captures the 4 primary strategic styles which we'll focus on in this session. But remember, there was a 5th dimension which we call survival. Maybe you're wondering, where is that survival strategy placed in our matrix? Well, it's placed on the outside of the matrix you created, to the far right of visionary and shaping. But we won't be working with that style in this session. If you're in the survival mode, it is important for you. So please remember why we're interested in this matter. We're interested in this matter because traditional strategic thinking does not fit the rapidly changing conditions most companies are faced with today, especially if they're hoping to survive and prosper. So during these fast-changing times, traditional approaches to company strategy are no longer effective. And as a result of that, we need to discover new ways to deal with the uncertain future we face.